Hi, I'm Karthik from designyourthinking.com, and in this video, I'm going to help you with 5 exercises that you can use to find your podcast idea. In the last video, I showed you how you can use questions as a way to outline your podcast. I shared 12 questions with you that you can use off the bat and help you articulate your podcast. Now, in today's video, I want to take one step back. One thing I've heard from a lot of new podcasters is they want to do a podcast, but they just don't know what podcast to do, which niche to pick, which idea to pick. So in this video, I'm going to help you with 5 exercises that you can use off the bat to actually come up with a podcast idea, so that you can use the 12 questions that I shared in my previous video to actually go ahead and flesh that out. Now, when I talk about coming up with a podcast idea, the most common question I get asked is, look, I already see someone else doing something like what I want to do. Now, let me tell you one thing. I grew up in the age of Backstreet Boys, and Backstreet Boys was a great success as a band. They did not stop because Boyzone existed. Boyzone was a boy band and it did exist before Backstreet Boys. But Backstreet Boys nevertheless went ahead and launched themselves. And because they did what they truly believed in, they were still a success. So it's really crazy for us to think that someone else has done it and we should not be doing it. We all have our own uniqueness. We have our own perspectives and points of view, and that's what makes us unique and hence our podcast unique. So if you are wondering that someone else is already having a podcast in the niche that you want to do or in the topic that you want to do, please don't worry. Go ahead and start to pick an idea and use my 12 questions to articulate your idea. At the end of these 2 exercises, you will have something very unique that people want to listen to because you have a voice, and that's exactly what you want to write on. So talking about the voice, that's my first exercise. You need to always start with your voice because it's your voice that makes you unique. Now, what is this voice thing? Voice is nothing but what you bring in, what makes you you. And that is always a factor of a lot of different things. The way you're brought up, what you were exposed to, the cultures, the geography, and a lot of other factors that go into it. And that's what makes you truly you. So, what is that makes you unique? The first thing I want you to think about when it comes to exploring your voice are those questions for which you're seeking an answer. Take a piece of paper, write down all the questions for which you are seeking an answer for. Now, it could be something philosophically big, what is the meaning of life? Or it could be something very specific, how to take great photographs. Now, whatever the question might be, write it down. These questions could be across multiple topics or genres or niches. It's okay. Write down those questions that you are looking for answers. The second thing I want you to think about when it comes to exploring your voice is, what do you really care about deeply? Now, we all have our own backgrounds and perspectives, and there are things that we care about deeply and there are things that we don't really care about much, and that could change from one person to the other, from me to you. What do you care about deeply? Now, these could be something big like traffic problem, or it could be music, or it could be something related to an industry like a music industry related problem, or it could be something related to productivity. Now, whatever it is, in that piece of paper that you have in front of you, start writing topics and areas in one sentence as to what are those things that you really care deeply about. Now, the third way to start with your voice is to actually think about why on the first place you thought about starting a podcast. There could be multiple reasons for you to think about it. Perhaps you've listened to a podcast for a long time and you really liked it and you just wanted to do it. It's as simple as that. Or perhaps it's something else. Like for me, I really loved speaking into the microphone back in school. So I thought, why not do it now? And I really liked performing in front of people. So this was a perfect reason for me to consider starting a podcast. So those are the 3 ways you can actually start with your voice. The second exercise I want you to do is to start with your audience in mind. Write down who your audience is. Who are they? Where will you find them? And why do you really want to connect with them and talk to them? Write this down, because the more you write, the more you get clearer inside your mind as to why you really want to do a podcast. Number 2, what do their typical days look like? Now, you picked up an audience. Now think about, what do their days look like? What do these people do? If you're talking about a podcast for Musicians, what kind of musicians are they? Are they jazz musicians or what else? Now, if they are jazz musicians, are you talking about touring jazz musicians or are you talking about people who perform jazz online? Now, you can get any deep with this. I'm not an expert at jazz, but then the whole idea is to think deeper about your audience and ask yourself this question as to what do their typical days look like? The third thing I want you to think about when it comes to starting with your audience is think about the questions that's on their mind. Now, if you're talking about jazz musicians who are touring, what questions do they have in their mind? Perhaps it's something to do with carrying and packing their instruments, or perhaps it's about connecting with their family and loved ones when they're touring. Now, it could be anything else. Think about these questions and write these questions down in the piece of paper in front of you. And number 4, think about what their needs, desires, fears, and concerns are. Write down all of this. Now, those are 4 ways to start with your audience. The third approach is actually ask yourself this question as to what conversation do you want to have with your audience. In exercise number 2, you talked about the audience. You started with your audience and you ended by asking yourself this question as to what are the needs, fears, desires, and concerns of your audience. So now take that one step further. Imagine that you're actually having a conversation, because in a podcast, what you're essentially doing is having this conversation, this dialogue with your listener. What is that conversation you want to have with your audience? Now take 5 minutes to actually write down these conversations that you want to have. It could be just bullets or it could be a paragraph. Whatever style suits you, just go with that. Write down those conversations that you want to have with your listener. Now, this is a great exercise and it probably ends up with you getting a lot of ideas. Now, if you don't have much ideas coming up yet, not to worry. Move on to the next exercise. Exercise number 4. Now that you had this conversation with your audience, what kind of podcast format would work best for this kind of conversation? Now, this is a question a lot of people struggle with because they don't have any much clue as to what really the podcast should be all about. But since you actually thought about your voice and then about your audience and about the conversation that you want to have, it's the right time for you to think about what kind of format you want to adopt to have this meaningful conversation. Now, there are multiple kinds of podcast formats that you can choose to adopt. The first one is a monologue. In this case, you're actually engaging with your audience by talking. It could be commenting on something or talking about a certain topic. Now, that's a monologue because you are talking. There is no conversation happening literally. The second format is interviews. Interviews are a great way of engaging with your audience because you're actually having a conversation going on inside of that podcast. So this conversation is a great way for your audience, your listeners, to actually listen in and feel like they're part of the conversation, and that encourages them to actually involve, engage with you. The third format is storytelling. Now, storytelling is another great format for you to take up. This format got a little popular with NPR doing a lot of their shows using soundscaping and narratives. So storytelling is an amazing format. If you're wondering what storytelling is all about, go ahead and check out my show, season 2. I have a lot of storytelling going in there. And there are shows from a lot of public radio stations in the US which actually use the storytelling format. Now, the fourth style that you probably want to consider is a freestyle conversation, like a banter, a freestyle talk. It could be with a co-host, or you could probably be doing it alone. If you're going with banter and freestyle, do it a little carefully because it doesn't really work for all kinds of conversations. That's exercise number 4. Exercise number 5. I went to iTunes and looked at the top 50 podcasts and I tried to see what are the different kinds of formats that these podcasts use and took ideas from that. So I'm going to share 10 different ideas here that you can probably take a cue from and see if it works for your podcast. The first idea is simplification or breaking down. Now, I've seen Planet Money doing this really smartly. They take a complex topic and try to peel the onion and try to get into the topic step by step, slowly exploring the inner depths of it. Now, you could choose to do something like this if you're trying to deal with a complex topic with your listeners. Idea number 2, go deeper and diverse. Now, this is another great podcast format where you're trying to get deep, but you're trying to take diverse perspectives from other genres and industries. Now when it comes to the shows, I've seen Exchanges by Goldman Sachs doing this really smartly. Number 3, interviews. Now, you've seen me doing this. You've seen a lot of podcasts doing this. Interviews is one of the most commonly used formats and something that people enjoy a lot, because like I said early on, when two people speak, the listener gets more interested to be a part of that conversation, and hence they get to engage a little better. Now, a great podcast in the iTunes Top 50 is How I Built This by NPR. Idea number 4 is use a reality show style. Now, you know what a reality show is. You could use something like that by actually recording your podcast live with somebody and trying to bring in a little bit of drama into it. Now, a great example for this from iTunes Top 50 is a podcast called The Pitch. Go check it out and see if this format works for you. Format number 5, coaching. Now, I've seen a lot of people do this too. And this format is pretty simple. If you are a subject matter expert or an authority in a certain topic or a certain niche, you can actually have people on the show who you can coach. You can actually coach them and record that conversation and have that broadcasted so that your listeners can listen in. Now, back to the iTunes charts. One show that I really see doing this really well is Ask Pat 2.0. Now, this is done by Pat Flynn, and you probably want to check out that show. Format number 6, discussion. You could actually have an ongoing discussion. It could be with one person or two people or many people on the show, depending on how complex you want to get. You can actually have a discussion going. It could be on a current topic or a topic that is of interest to your audience. You can use the time with your listener to actually have a discussion going so that you actually start to involve your listener as well. Now, an example from the iTunes Top 50 is Jocko Podcast. Go and check it out, and you probably will find this kind of format interesting for your show. Idea number 7, use thought leadership. Now, if you are an expert, you can use your podcast to actually talk about it. You can position yourself as the thought leader in that topic, in that niche, or in that area, so that you can actually start to give advice, talk about future, give predictions and whatnot. Now, a great example for this from iTunes Top 50 is the Harvard Business Review podcast, HBR podcast, and it's a podcast that a lot of business leaders listen to. So that's idea number 7. Idea number 8, storytelling. Now, I talked about this idea early on in exercise number 4. Storytelling is essentially trying to use that time, that air time with your listener to tell them a story or narrate something to your listener like you're actually watching that happen or unfold in front of your own eyes. Now, a great example for this kind of a format is Startup Podcast by Alex Bloomberg, and he really does a great job out of this. And format number 9, news. Now, if you're someone who is actually following a lot of happenings in your niche or industry, and you get to know things pretty early on and have a say on them, you probably should consider something like a news format. A great podcast that actually does this in iTunes Top 50 is This Morning by Goldman Sachs. And format number 10 is education. Now, if you're somebody who is a teacher or teaching something or can teach something to your audience, you should probably start to use the podcast to teach something. A podcast that really does a great job out of this in the iTunes Top 50 is The $100 MBA by Omar Zenhom. So those are the 5 different exercises that I really want to share with you in this video. I really hope you found them useful, but more importantly, I want you to put that to action right now. Like I said, open a piece of paper, go back to the beginning of this video and start doing this exercise. And I'm sure you're going to come up with some ideas. And when you have them, don't hesitate to go and leave a comment right below this video. I'm going to take a look at each one of your ideas and put my comments right there, and I really look forward to having this conversation. So if you really like listening to this video, go ahead and like this video right below. No matter where you're listening to this, Facebook, YouTube, wherever it is, like this video, share this video with people you know. And I really appreciate if you like this format, if you like this show, go subscribe to my channel. If it's on YouTube that you're watching my video, just go down, click the subscribe button. Once you do that, click the small reminder icon next to it so that you get notified whenever I have my next video out. So I truly appreciate you spending the last few minutes watching this video, and I truly appreciate you going and putting in the hard work, because that's what differentiates people who do from people who dream. So go be a doer, try out this exercise on a piece of paper, leave your comments right below, and I would love to have this conversation going. And as you know, I am Kart V on pretty much every social media channel that you can find. So I hang out a lot on Instagram, so you can find me at Kart V on Instagram or wherever you choose to. Thank you so much for listening in. Until I see you in the next video, cheers.